Is the organization you work for unsustainable? A lot of people have been feeling that way recently and would like to change their company from the inside. If that's you, stick around.
Welcome to Green Talks, a show run by Green Hub, the sustainability office of the University of Twente. I'm your co-host Clizia.
And I'm Fran. Join us as we delve into the topics of sustainability, circularity, and the energy transition with guest experts leading the way to a greener future.
That's right. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a new episode of Green Talks. Hello, Fran.
Hi, Clizia.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm also good. So, how was your talk today? Who did you talk with?
It was a great interview. I can't wait to get into it. I talked to Barbara Kump. She's a researcher of organizational change and an associate professor here at the University of Twente. As she would say, she's fascinated by processes of change and transition, which really comes through when she's talking about it. And it is exactly these processes and transitions that are necessary for a global transformation into a sustainable society, which is why I was so keen on having her on the podcast.
Okay, that sounds really difficult because it's a lot of big words. But what did you like the most about her or about what she says? And
I really like how relevant, and I think you'll see this. It's a really relevant interview right now, considering we just the ESG is becoming a big thing, reporting on environment, society, and governance. So companies are really now starting to get to grips with having to transition and starting this sustainability transition. And a lot of people in these companies are not happy with the speed at which this is happening.
Because it's too slow, I guess?
It's too slow.
Yeah.
But there's so much positive momentum now that is already happening that I think this interview really fits nicely into if somebody wants to come in and make this transition faster and make sure that their business transitions in a just, sustainable way. I think the knowledge that Barbara possesses is really key towards really shifting a lot of businesses towards a sustainable economy.
All right. And which SDGs do you think this episode will target?
So this is again one of those episodes where it's more about the approach than about a specific target and goal, because I think the knowledge from this interview can be used for any of the SDGs. So if your business is heavy on water usage, you can use your insider activism to make it use less water. But I think if I had to choose one SDG, it would be SDG 12, Sustainable Production and Consumption, because that one really targets businesses and production, like changing the production and consumption aspect of our economy to shift it to a more sustainable one, especially targets that talk of companies that need to do a sustainable transition. So if you're an employee in a company that you not think is fully aligning with SDG 12, I think you could really use information from this interview.
Great. So I hope that one of our listeners, or hopefully even more, will find this content really helpful.
I certainly hope so.
Okay, so let's jump into the interview.
Hi, Barbara. Welcome to Green Talks. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I already will have given a brief introduction to your work, but I'm sure that you can do it better than I can. So if you don't mind telling the audience a bit about you and what it is exactly that you do.
Yeah, hello. Thanks very much for having me. I'm very glad to be here. I am an associate professor of business and sustainability working at the ETM section, entrepreneurship and technology management at University of Twente. And I do mostly research on organizational change for sustainability. And in the past, I have been doing a lot of work on micro foundations of organizational change. I'm a trained cognitive psychologist or cognitive and organizational psychologist. That means I'm really interested in the processes, the individual and collective processes underlying organizational change. For example, what are challenges of organizational change related to people's identity or people's knowledge, and how knowledge and what they do does not fit anymore when they change their organizations. And these kinds of things. So all the things that underlie organizational change and that make change difficult. And then I've moved in the past 6 years or so into organizational change for sustainability. And I'm now really interested in how can we change organizations so they become more sustainable. Why do they change? Why do they not change? If they try to become more sustainable, what are the challenges? And how can we also make them change? I think that's a very interesting angle that I've been taking most recently. So all these questions around organizations with a focus on sustainability.
I can't wait to jump into that. But before we do, I need to ask you our icebreaker question. What is your most unsustainable guilty pleasure?
Well, that's a tricky one because, of course, there is always going to conferences where you have to fly, but I really try to keep that to a minimum these days. So I think when you ask me, one of the guilty pleasures where I also feel a bit guilty is when taking long, hot showers. That I really, really enjoy that. But I feel always a little bit guilty when I do it, but I really enjoy it too much not to do it. Yeah, so it's really a pleasure to do it.
I completely get that one. I think that's probably one of my top ones as well. Well, with that out of the way, I think we can move on to questions related to your work. So you already told us a bit about what you're working on in your research. Is there anything more you'd like to add?
Well, I could, if you want to dive a bit deeper into current projects I'm working on, maybe to give 2 examples. One is I'm doing research into the role of imagined futures and how these futures help us to work towards organizational change. And in this context, we are studying in an autoethnography approach, which means that we are studying our own experiences of a situation where we decided with a bunch of researchers to go on a conference by sailboat instead of flying there. So the conference was in Naples. And for example, in my case, I went from Enschede by train. So the conference, was in Calgary, not in Naples. But I went by train to Naples, and then we went on a sailboat, and we went from Naples to Calgary with 10 researchers. We thought it would be all very sustainable. We would sail there. We would have academic conversations on the ocean. So we had this really positive view of making a sustainable trip, of making an organizational change or giving an example of how things can be done differently. And then we encountered all kinds of problems there. For example, we had face wind, so we couldn't go as much as we wanted by sailboat, and we used a lot of fuel at the end, and that was very frustrating because that didn't enable us to be very sustainable. People got sick, so we couldn't really do academic conversations, but we were more focused on not being too sick and stuff like that. And then also there was this issue that a big tuna was caught and then also disassembled and on the boat, and that was a very traumatic experience for some of the people who are also vegans and so forth. So that caused a lot of debate, and based on that we really started to discuss and started to try to understand the discrepancy between such a utopian vision of doing something in a different way and the practical obstacles you're facing. And based on that, we are now writing, based on these experiences, we're writing on the role of embodying a utopian vision and how future ideas can really make people change, but what happens if you encounter such obstacles if you really try to embody it. So that is one project, so the role of futures and of ideal images of the future and organizational change. And another project I'm working on is also very closely related to what I do myself. It's we call that willing hybrids, and it's a different context. So the idea is that if you bring sustainability into organizations, in many cases that doesn't fit the established logic. So you create a hybrid logic. So for example, in our case study that we have, it's a university that decided to bring an impact logic into the academic system logic, and there are many conflicts, right? So academic system logic means you have to publish a lot and you have to get all these grants. And then if you have an impact logic, that means you need to help people solve problems, and you're normally not trained for that, and you're also not incentivized for that as a researcher. So what happens when you bring such a hybrid, when you create such hybridity by bringing sustainability or societal impact into an established organization? And what normally has been done so far is so it has been assumed that hybridity creates problems and people oppose it because they don't like it. But what we show is that there are also a lot of people who like that hybridity. So for example, in the academic system, there are many young researchers who want to work on sustainability, to work on practical challenges rather than just publishing papers. And also in organizations, there are more and more people who become something like climate quitters who don't want to stay in organizations anymore that do harm to the environment. So they are actually happy if the organization becomes more sustainable. So there are people we call willing hybrids who willingly have that hybridity and try to deal with the complexities they are facing and all the implications. And then we try to show how these willing hybrids impact organizational change and if that makes it easier or not. And these kinds of questions. So two very different examples, but examples that are really about the micro foundations of organizational change towards sustainability.
It's really interesting. And why exactly is it interesting to look at businesses specifically in the context of sustainability?
Well, yeah, for some, let's say, climate researchers or sustainability researchers, business may be not the obvious choice. For me, it is one of the obvious choices because I think that businesses are the main thing that has to be changed if we want to change our society towards more sustainable practices, because businesses are the place where most of the harm is created. They create not because they are evil, but because they do it for consumers, but they create, nevertheless, pollution, have fossil fuel, they are based on fossil fuels, produce emissions, create a lot of wastewater that damages the planet, and all these things. So businesses are really the site of where these negative impacts usually take place. And the second reason is, because they are the site, they also need to be changed. So that's the first reason. And the second reason why I think they're one of the most important aspects to look at is also because they have a lot of impact on politics. So businesses really, through lobbyists, but also through funding and stuff like that, have a quite direct influence on decisions that are made on the policy level. It's a very strong entanglement. And if we can change businesses and business behavior, then I think that is a very strong lever also for politics. So I think the two cannot be looked at separately. And I think also you cannot put the burden on consumers or customers to change their behavior. Customers, of course, play a crucial role, but it's really about how to change the businesses themselves and the organizations that are the site. And I'm not saying the cause, but the place where all the problems occur, or most of the problems.
And if I'm not wrong, you used to just study businesses and that aspect of it, and sustainability came later.
Yeah, so in my research, indeed, sustainability came later. 6 years ago, there I decided I asked myself, how can I combine what I am doing with something more meaningful? And then I thought, okay, either I have to stop doing that research and go out on the streets, or dedicate my research and academic work, and also especially the teaching, to the topic of sustainability.
And what sparked that decision?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, it is surprising that I came to it that late, because actually I was rather close to nature. I grew up very close to nature as a child, and as a teenager also always wanted to go to the rainforest and save the forest and stuff like that. But somehow, I don't know how it happened, but I never really integrated it in my professional life. And a few years ago, I think what really sparked it, when I think back now, is Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future movement, when I saw all those people going to the streets. And I think that kind of reminded me of those roots, of that aspect of my life that was really important for me personally, but that I had not focused on in my professional life. And it was kind of a wake-up call to say, actually, what are you doing? So why are you not working on this also? Why do you do that in your private life and save the water and buy second-hand stuff, but not in your work? And then I really realized, I'm actually at the source and at the core of what is the problem. But if you work only with businesses, where the consciousness is not so high, then that's not the most obvious choice to move from a classic business research to a sustainability research. So also in that area, I'm a bit more of an unusual case, I would say, maybe.
And I mean, I hope that more and more people make the similar shift. And in case we have people now waking up and wanting to change their own organizations and businesses, do you have any tips from your research for how to make change in their organizations?
Well, that's also an interesting question, because I have this, let's call it side project, which takes these days more and more time of my work life also, but also of my personal life, because it's partly a side project. I'm working together with my colleague Babette Brinkmann, a group dynamics expert and also an organizational psychologist and researcher on the topic, on a book for people who want to change their companies from within. We call them employee activists at the moment, for the lack of a better word. So we are really trying to write up tips and tricks in practice for people who want to change their company from within. So who really want to, like myself also, bring their concerns, their values for the environment, or their environment-related goals and interests into their companies and change them from within. And so you asked me about tips and tricks, I think.
Do you have any bits of advice?
Well, there are many bits of advice. I think one is really at the beginning, if you want to change your company, or if you work in a company that is not sustainable, be aware that you can make a change from wherever you are. The change can be smaller or larger. That also depends on how far you're ready to go yourself, right? So there are many approaches to what we call insider activism, but not all of them are really activist approaches. Some can also be more related to gentle persuasion and trying to, slowly but steadily convince people to, convince your managers to do things differently. But there, of course, are also more radical approaches, like really, leaking information to the media or organizing strikes. And I think the first bit of advice is really to get aware first that you can change something from wherever you are in your organization, and then second also to decide what type of activist you want to be, more the gentle one or more the radical one. And normally people start with a gentle approach and try to see how far they can get. And then if you start if you decide you want to start changing things within your company, then it's also interesting to start looking at the core business of your company. So what is the main reason for their existence? What is their purpose? And what are their main products and services? And where do they do the most harm? So, for example, if we are a university, then I think our main focus, our main, let's call it the core business, is really to do research and to educate students. And that is also our area where we have the most impact. So because if we manage to educate students and create awareness of sustainability, that makes a very big difference versus if we just teach students also business as usual, not only in business courses but also in all technical classes, neglect this perspective that sustainability is relevant, because all the people will go to business lives at some point, our students, and they need to understand that there are alternatives to what we are currently doing and currently teaching. So that's the example of the university. So if we want to be insider activists at university, it is interesting to look at, okay, how can we improve how we are doing sustainability-wise in our research, in our teaching, in our core business. Of course, it's also always interesting to look at side activities, like is the cafeteria also environmentally friendly, or how do we travel to conferences, or are our buildings insulated and stuff like that. That is also relevant, but I think that the most powerful approach to insider activism really is to look at the core businesses that people are doing. And then there are all kinds of strategies that you can take. Always look at the constellation of forces, that's how I would call it. Really look at what are the forces that are maintaining the status quo, and look at forces that you can use that are already shifting the status quo a bit. So, for example, are customer demands changing? Are employees or your colleagues' demands or values changing? So all of that are changing force streams that can help you as an employee activist to change your company, that give you arguments to convince managers to change your company from within. So these are just a few tips. I could talk for hours, of course, but I think you will have to wait for the book because we don't have time.
Yeah, I will wait for the book. I really want to read it. I hope you'll tell me when it comes out.
Yeah, let's hope next year sometime. We are already signed a contract with the publisher, so it's next year, hopefully, early.
Is this, if you don't mind me asking, is this book and the type of activities you do, are they related to you trying to use your research to change the institutions you're already part of and systems, or do you see them as separate, just wanting to share the knowledge?
Well, I think I want to be a translator of knowledge about organizations for people who don't necessarily have that knowledge. So often employee activists, for example, are engineers in companies who have a lot of technical knowledge but don't know how to change the organizations. And the book is targeted at these people. So I see myself as we see the book as a service to those people who don't have that expertise about organizations, to help them find good ways to change organizations. But of course, it's also applying a bit of my own experiences and bringing that into the book. So also I try myself to change a little bit the organization that I'm part of. So I think we have also worked together previously, trying to come up with criteria, what is good research partnership with people from the fossil fuel industry and stuff like that. So I really try also to apply the knowledge I have myself and try to practice what I preach, or how do you say that? Pray what I preach, I think is the right word. So I think that's my general approach to research, also with sustainability, to really not look too much at things only from a distance, but also try to gain some experience on the topic myself, to also have some practical experience about what I'm saying, also related to sustainability. So I think that's really one of my goals, to not talk to people about their things, which I don't know much about, but really to intertwine it and to make research very relevant also, and to apply what I know from research in my own practices, and really to try to combine the two aspects.
Wow. I think we're nearing the end of our conversation. So before we close off, would you like to share some main takeaways that you might have for the listeners coming out of this interview? Well, I think I said it already. My main takeaway is when it comes to businesses and sustainability, that I think there is no way around that business will have to change in the near future, or at least midterm future, but rather near future, that they can change, that if they change proactively, it's normally easier than if they change forced. So that's based on what we know from change management. And also that employees can really make a difference in a company. They can encourage change. They can help facilitate and enhance change within their organizations from wherever they are. And it's always a choice of how much you want to push it. And that should be a conscious choice. So not just jump on the organization and try to change everything. I think that's also a bit dangerous for yourself, career-wise, I mean. But everybody can make changes if they know how to do it and where to start. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. It was an incredibly interesting interview. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that the listeners did too. I can't wait for the book to come out and to properly read it. Is there a title already? Not yet, right? Not really. No, the last one was Don't Quit Act, but publishers didn't like the title too much, so I don't know, maybe it will change. But yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting to talk to you, although I talked mostly. That's always funny when people say at the end of an interview, it was interesting. Right? It's also interesting because you don't normally get that space to really just talk for 20 minutes. So thank you very much. It was very nice. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you would like to stay updated on all new episodes, make sure to subscribe to Green Talks on your favorite podcasting platform, whether it's Spotify, Google Podcasts, Deezer, or more. You can also find video versions of the podcast on YouTube. We are your hosts, Klitzia and Fran. Melania Ardelan is our editor, and the show is organized by Green Hub, the sustainability office of the University of Twente in Enschede, Netherlands.
See you in the next episode of Green Talks.